I'm going to go ahead and start recording this for folks online. And today we're just going to be going over a PowerPoint concerning design and how you guys can design your documents. So if it lasts the full 50 minutes, that's fine. If it doesn't, that's fine too. All right. All right. So again, we're going through designing visual information. By the end of the lesson, what we want to try to get to is explaining why visuals are so important in technical communication, even when we're talking about um, building popular reports and reports that are going to be aesthetically pleasing. Determine when to use visuals, describe the various types of visuals that we will consider, select the right visuals for the readers, and use basic advanced software applications to create visuals. There's a ton of those out there. We're also going to try to learn a little bit about creating tables. Now, I'm not going to go in depth on how to create those tables, but you have several programs out there that will cookie cutter those things for you. Whether they be the graphs or any of that stuff. The fact is, though, when it comes to building those, you need to make sure that the information that they're going to be relaying is going to be clear and it's going to be understandable. Um, graphic illustrations are going to be very important, especially when you're considering things like um, instructional design or even when it comes to popular reports, you're going to want to have something that's going to have some kind of aesthetically pleasing uh, graphics and images that will help draw readers in. And that's going to be going over. You also want to identify, we're going to be talking about ethical issues in this as well, and understanding how cultural considerations affect choices for visuals. So visuals typically help make data easier to interpret and remember. We commit these things to memory uh, far better than, say, just text alone. Uh, we are a very we're a very in-depth race that loves uh, colors and uh, things that are going to draw us in. They help us to create mnemonic devices or what have you within certain images. Uh, Visuals are going to help reveal meanings that might otherwise remain buried. Um, Say you have a significant amount of data that you want to try to relate to your audience, and you want to do so as clearly as possible. Visuals are some of the best ways to make that happen. Stating numbers within text is one thing. People tend to get buried within that text, and the impact that you want to show. Remember, this is rhetorical. So those lists, those facts, those figures, all that good stuff. If you've got those buried in text, people will skim them. People may miss them, or it may just not carry the impact that you want them to carry, which is just as bad. So by putting those in figures and tables, you really punch home the effect that this is important, that there is a stark contrast, especially when you're talking about bar graphs. They can really help push, you know, specific information as far as how dire or how drastic a change is. They want more than just raw information because we are rhetorical creatures. We want to be able to be moved during a specific thing, even if it's something as simple as stereo instructions. You'll have There is a debate amongst academics today that uh, certain technical communications, certain technical documents should remain non-rhetorical. But I challenge anyone to make anything non-rhetorical. Everything is rhetorical, even when you're not trying to be rhetorical. In fact, it will become more rhetorical. Um, by that, I mean the more pressure you try to add to something, the more um, drastic it looks. So people want that so that they can understand it at a glance, especially if you're talking about executive summaries or within executive documents when people are going to be making decisions and they need to uh, peruse it quickly, to go through it quickly, scan it. Um, they're going to help answer questions that they may have that may pop up. So you want to consider certain things. You want to consider what information is going to be the most important. What information do you want to draw the most drastic conclusions to? Where exactly should that focus? Do you want to bring attention to uh, specific areas, and also how you want to bring that attention? Make sure that your bar graphs represent something that shows that it's more drastic and not just some kind of like bar graph that has little fluctuations. We want to see, so if you have to maybe make the parameters of that bar graph uh, a little different in order, not saying corrupt the data, but enough to where it shows a starker contrast. So maybe move it from whole numbers to decimals or whatever. Make sure that people understand what those numbers mean. It's not enough to just go in and start throwing numbers within a chart or a graph. They have to understand what it means, and that'll typically come with some key or legend within that document or within that underneath that graph in some way. And what should I be thinking or doing? What should you be telling your audience? Is it going to further the argument of whatever you're speaking about? Don't just start sticking charts and graphs in because you think they look pretty or because Professor Ward's going to want one in here, so let's go ahead and stick a bar graph in here so that it'll make him happy. No, it's gotta make an argument. There's got to be a reason for it. I'd rather you have none than to force an argument for one. So really, it's about what you want me to remember or what you want your reader to remember. Also, you want to make sure that it's aesthetically pleasing and that it's got some kind of a color scheme that's matching, that's not contrasting too greatly with the rest of the document. You want to make sure that it's, aesthetically pleasing, that is rhetorical. How's it organized? Organization and how it's done and how it works are extremely important towards understanding what it is and how it works. Poor organization in it can easily lose a reader. And I know we have all seen documents where there has been a bar graph chart, pie chart, whatever, within there that we have just been looking at it, scratching our heads, wondering what the hell was that person thinking? What are they trying to tell me? What are they trying to show me? Make sure that it's clear and understandable and that it encourages or that it reinforces the argument that you're making within your paper, within your document. Otherwise, don't use it. You want to make sure that you're using these when they make your point clearly and more clearly than text alone can do it. All right, it's not enough. You also want the paper to exist without that chart. It should be able to exist without it. What we mean by enhances is make sure that it's something that is It's sort of like a PowerPoint along with the speech, right? So it's like when you're giving some kind of speech, and let's say you want to emphasize specific points or whatever, you'll add pictures, bullet points, text, all that good stuff. The same thing works with charts and graphs, but you also have to understand too that, let's just say there's a problem with the power within a speech, or some kind of hardware issue. You have to be able to still deliver that speech without it. The same goes with these texts, with these graphs and bar charts and things like that. Now, the text, again, will get lost within the bigger body of the text. The data can become lost, and that's the problem. And that's why we want to enhance it using certain imagery. Make sure that you're using visuals to clarify and support discussion, not just to decorate the document. We've already talked about that. Then you want to make sure that you're using visuals to direct the audience's focus. You really want to make these things something that's going to hammer it home for a reader. Typically with any document, your introduction and your conclusion are going to be the things that stick with a reader. Consider that when you're out developing your popular reports. You always want to make the conclusion kind of like your Alamo, your last stand. You want that memorable. You want to make sure that you retouch on a few points that you mentioned in the document, in the body of the document, all that good stuff. But the same thing works with visuals. Visuals are also going to be starkly remembered by your readers, along with the intro and the conclusion. So make sure that you're using those when you want somebody to remember something, but also try to remember that you don't want to overload. Okay, avoid overload, because the more you use those visuals, the more you use those charts and graphs and all that stuff, the less impact they carry. So make sure that you're using them in sparse ways that really attack and really make a good point. There's nothing worse in technical communication than picking up a document and it's just filled with charts and graphs that really, some of those are just unnecessary, but people think that they should add it because they feel some kind of professional pull to do so or what have you, and that's just not the case. We don't have to have that. They come in categories like tables, graphs, charts, and graphic illustrations. Tables are going to typically display organized data across columns and rows for easy comparison. And again, make sure that you can see a comparison across these that is at least stark in some way. And if you have to, go to the decimal place to try to make it look like there is of a more of a difference. You don't want a bar graph that's going to be arranged in columns where it just looks like everything's damn near equal. So with graphs, you want to translate numbers into shapes, shades, patterns. We've done those. As technical communicators within your fields, I challenge many of you to tell me that you haven't used these things before. Charts are going to depict relationships via geometric arrows, lines, and other design elements. Try not to get, you'll see certain people who will use charts and things that will use little caricatures of people, the way that they should look. They'll have, they'll get very creative with the design, but be very careful with the design. You don't want to go and get too artsy with it, like you just stepped out of the hobby shop with that chart. You want to make it look like that it still needs to look professional. And when you start adding a lot of different homemade design elements or flashing text or any of that stuff, it can start to detract from the overall professional argument you're trying to make. Then you have the graphic illustrations. These are extremely important. And as I'm going, if anybody has a question or whatever, feel free to please chime in. Please Um, you know, say something if you want to. It's not like we're in a classroom environment where I can just start pointing to people and say, "What do you think graphic illustration's used for?" Um, but graphic illustrations are extremely important, especially for instruction manuals. There's nothing in this world worse than grabbing a piece of IKEA furniture and having nothing but a list of instructions and no pictures to show me what I'm doing right or wrong. All right. So typically, those kinds of instructions are paired well with alcohol. You want to try to stay away. You want to try to include images as best as you can. All right. So rely on pictures to help show the reader what to do instead of just telling them what to do. The same thing is going to happen with um, popular reports to some extent. The only difference is you may not typically be showing someone what to do so much as trying to, because the primary purpose of the popular report is going to be to entertain. All right. So the primary report, the secondary purpose is going to be to inform. The primary purpose is going to be to entertain. And then to entertain, your graphic illustration, you will be typically relying on that to a certain extent. You want a graphic illustration that is going to spring a little imagination within the mind. You're going to want a graphic illustration that's going to make people start to think a little bit more heavily about what they're speaking about, all that stuff. So make sure that you pair that graphic image or that illustration well with the information that you're speaking about. If you're speaking about bridges, it might be better to say have a picture of an engineer working, using blueprints, schematics, or whatever, in a corner, just to kind of like generate a general idea for where you're going within that popular report. But it would be better to have something like that than just say some flower sitting in there or some picture of a toy or whatever. You want to kind of relate it. You really want to relate it so that it's putting your reader into the right frame of mind when they're coming in and trying to read your product. Selecting the most effective display, you want to answer these questions. What's the purpose for using this visual? Do I want to show facts, figures, show parts of a mechanism, give direction, show relationships? Do I want to um, generate more discussion? Do I want to try to pull people into the argument a little bit more? Do I want to have someone understand how this certain process works? How or which direction do I turn the knob? These kinds of things. Who is my audience for these visuals? Is it going to be an expert audience, an audience of your peers who may know which way to turn that knob or whatnot? Or is it a more general audience who may get up there and turn the knob completely off of the machine because they were trying to turn it in the wrong direction? Or is it a global audience? And I've had this happen, um, trying to instruct someone once on how to try to change brake pads, trying to tell them how to turn a bolt and them just going and shearing the head off the bolt because they thought that they were going with the old lefty loosey righty tighty, but the way that the brake uh, assembly sits over the hub, everything is reversed, and they didn't realize that. And when they were turning the wrench, they ended up shearing the head off of one of the bolts, and it cost them a little bit more money to go and get that fixed. So it's important to understand and put visualizations where you might be able to and hell, it may even behoove you to make it a little larger, put it in red, whatever you have to do to try to keep people from shearing that bolt or whatever. Um, Especially when you're talking about a global audience, you could be talking about the differences between empirical and standard. You could be or empirical and metric. You could be talking about some vast differences with the way someone is going to be working within that. So make sure that you understand who that audience is going to be. With your popular reports, it's about understanding who your audience is going to be very, very specifically. Right. So With a popular report, you're going to be looking at, this is a non-expert audience typically, but you also want to say it in such a way, or write it in such a way that if you have an expert pick that document up, they don't feel played down to. So you want to try to still keep it professional. You don't want to corrupt data, and you want to still make sure that the general audience picks up what you're saying. Um, Other than that, you want to make sure that you're understanding what form of information is going to best achieve the purposes for the audience. Is the message best conveyed by numbers, words, shapes, pictures, symbols? Uh, or or is it best if you refrain from those things in specific cases? Again, you want to avoid image overload. Images are great complementary pieces to enhance specific areas, documents, to pull numbers out, to make things stand out. They can also start to overload, and the more you overload images, the more it becomes more like a picture book. You will have experts put it down and say that it's not worth even my time, or you'll lose emphasis where you should have emphasis. Many visuals can be created, different applications, spreadsheet software such as Microsoft Excel, Apple Numbers, those can generate some great tables and stuff, but you don't even have to go that far. I mean, Microsoft Word, if you're going in and you're designing, let's say you're going in and you're working on your document within Microsoft Word, your popular report, and you want to generate, a specific uh, graph or chart or whatever, they have excellent templates within Microsoft Word that will go in and help you build those. All you have to do is enter the data. So they've pretty much made it, they've almost made it idiot proof, but I can guarantee you that I will still bog that system down because I am a special kind of idiot when it comes to that stuff. That said, it is excellent. It really helps out. So check out, don't ever just dismiss Microsoft Word. Some of the basic programs are some of the best. I mean, they have really good graphic design, you know, suites out there. Adobe has great suites that let you just do a number of things. But the problem with them is they can be extremely expensive. And Microsoft materials are typically free to students. Even Google Docs now has some great ways of implementing charts and graphs and things. Now, they're not as intuitive uh, because it's typically more of a freeware version, which is the old way of Google. Now Google's actually moving into this weird adware kind of space. Um, they're not as intuitive. They may not be as manipulatable as, say, Microsoft Word and things like that. So my recommendation, go mess around with Microsoft Word, go mess around with Publisher. Publisher is another great thing. I've even seen people go and build great design graphics using PowerPoint. So don't knock PowerPoint either. Presentation and WordPress software such as PowerPoint, Word, Apple Keynote, and Pages. And again, I'm not trying to get into an argument of Microsoft versus Apple here, but Microsoft is a little easier for people in academia to use because they typically make their software free to us, or universities will go out and buy these huge packages from Microsoft. Apple gets very expensive because of monthly subscriptions. So you can sometimes go out with Apple and get certain months for free or weeks for free, or depending on whatever they're trying to push. So if you want to go and you want to use that limited time, fine, by all means, go do it. The problem with that is that after that, you're going to have to start paying for it. And typically people don't want to pay for it. So it's like all that time and energy you just spent training yourself with Apple, you could have used that spending it on Microsoft and become just as much of an expert and continue to use Microsoft. But, to each their own. You know, if you got that money in the bag, you know, you got that money, you like to just go and kick around and burn or whatever, by all means, knock yourself out. All right, so for more sophisticated visuals, you want to use more advanced programs, Adobe Illustrator, Corel Draw. These all allow you to sketch, edit, and refine diagrams and drawings. You also have abilities to go and use software that is also provided to you, especially you engineers out there. Microsoft, or like you have some specific CAD tools that you can use that can help you do high-end drawings. There are also freeware software programs out there if you want to that have some pretty decent features that will allow you to make some decent drawings in CAD drawings if you wanted to do it that way. But that's going to take some investigation on your part. I've never investigated those. I do have some of the Microsoft provided CAD tools that you can go and you can download from the Microsoft Download Suite. And they are phenomenal, but they use a ton of processing power in some cases. So make sure that you are on a system that can handle it. Your common standard run-of-the-mill $300 laptop from Walmart just won't do it. So make sure that you have something with hella RAM, good graphics features, all that good stuff before you start digging into those CAD tools. Photos can be highlighted and refined using Adobe Photoshop, which is great, but you can also use Microsoft Suite. Again, listen, it's not that I am a Microsoft champ. I'm not getting any money for pushing Microsoft, but I am pushing something that I know. It's something that I have used my entire academic career. And while outside of academia, you do pay for an annual subscription to them. I think it's like $30 for the year, which I still think is robbery. Still, it's a lot better than that monthly payment to Adobe for 10 to $50 a month. I think they're doing it 10 to $50, depending on what you have, the features, the programs, all that good stuff. Photoshop is amazing though, it's extensive. But I'll be damned, you can go out right now and get some great phone apps that will do the exact same things these days. Your iPhones, your Android phones, things like that will come out with some great features on their phones, and then Bluetooth that over or email that to yourself or Wi-Fi that over to your laptop, and you can implement that within your documents. So don't knock using your phone. Your phone has a great camera, and a lot of them come with some really good photo editing software within them. Tables display dense textual information such as specifications and comparisons. Numerical tables present quantitative information, data that can be measured, and prose tables present qualitative information such as descriptions, explanations, and instructions. These are extremely important to keep data from becoming buried into the text and less accessible to the reader. If you really want to emphasize specific points of data and drive something home, if you want to show, the differences between, smoker age groups, smoker brands, and all that good stuff, if you really want to show a stark difference and really hammer home that data, using a table can really help you. Graphs translate numbers into shapes, shades, and patterns, like we've already said. They're going to display at a glance the approximate values, the point being made about those values, and the relationships being emphasized. Again, those graphs, go mess around with Microsoft Word. They have some excellent graphs to go in, and honestly, all you have to do is plug in the data. You plug in that data, it does it for you. I'm all about the WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, drag and drop kind of stuff. If you can just go in, plug in some information, and be done with it, by all means, why are you doing anything else? Graphs are especially useful for depicting comparisons and changes over time, patterns and trends. So if you really want to drive those things home, say you guys are developing a PowerPoint or a Popular report where you're discussing comparisons of global, climate change and these things over the past thousand, hundreds, decades, whatever years. You want to go and show these patterns. Graphs are excellent ways to pull that off. Bar graphs are going to show discrete comparisons such as a year by year, month to month. But again, you want to make sure that you have some kind of comparison that makes it somewhat stark. Okay, there's nothing worse than looking at one of these bar graphs and seeing it almost level across the board. It's almost a why bother kind of feature, In those cases, it might behoove you to go and start using decimal points and things like that to try to make a more vast bar graph, something that makes it look a little better, a little more dramatic, a little bit more intense. They're going to display one trend or a theme with a simple bar graph, and multiple bar graphs typically will get a little more complicated, showing 2 or 3 relationships simultaneously. Horizontal bar graphs are good for displaying a large series of bars arranged in order of increasing to decreasing value. You do typically see these, especially when you're talking about looking at, any of you ever go and look at MarketWatch, any of the box business or any of that stuff. These are some of your more valuable graphs because they create a more dramatic effect. All right, they show, and that's basically all these things is. The difference between the rhetorical and the horizontal, the vertical and the horizontal bar graph is simply rhetorical. It's rhetorical in that it makes it feel a bit more dramatic. Stacked bar graphs are going to show how much each data set contributes to the whole. These can be very useful, especially when you're talking about when you're going between genders, when you might be talking about specific jobs. Be careful going too intense with these because they can also get very convoluted very quickly, especially just simply looking at the little key at the top of that where it says women and men. When you've got 5, 6 different things that you're running in there, like different jobs for within a factory, within a manufacturer or whatever, it can get so convoluted that it can become confusing. So be very careful with how you do that. 100% bar graph shows the value of each part, how each one takes up certain things. And again, I'm going to reemphasize, be careful with using too much data in this, too much information. If anything, simplify it a little bit. Combine a couple of the, you might want to say raise risk, lowers risk, no effect on risk, and say like don't know could be your miscellaneous, okay? Combine several non-essential portions of the data into a miscellaneous. And you can explain within the text, not in the graph, but in the text, what you mean by miscellaneous. This could be, these things, whatever. But don't convolute, don't crowd the graph, okay? 3D bar graph is going to show a 3-dimensional view. Again, you can pull these up in Microsoft Word. They make really good 3-dimensional view bar graphs, 3-dimensional bar graphs. These are more about aesthetics and making them a little bit more pleasing, and it's simply about being rhetorical. Line graphs, a lot of you are going to be using these throughout your careers. If you're chemical engineering, things like that, simple line graphs are huge, very big. They're used often in chemical engineering, environmental engineering, and all those things. So these are going to be plotting time intervals or categories on the horizontal scale and values on the vertical scale. Again, be clear, but you want to specifically look at your tick marks, okay? You want to look at Like in the left-hand column, when you're talking about the vertical axis, you want to make sure that you're not overloading that with tick marks. Try to keep it as clear and precise as possible. The same with the bottom tick marks when you're talking about on the horizontal. When you're talking about the horizontal axis, don't overload, and keep in mind that typically you may have down there longer words than Jan, Feb, Mart, that kind of stuff. In those cases, it might help to, angle that information in there a little bit. Again, be careful. If you could typically look at this chart, and if you wanted to, you could skip every other month in this chart and just say Jan, Mar, May, July. You could go and do that, and then leave the rest to the reader. They're not idiots. Leave the rest to the reader to actually do what they need to do, if that's what you chose. Multi-line graphs display several relationships simultaneously. Again, this is something you see often in chemical engineering, environmental engineering. Sociology uses this quite a bit. Make sure that you are using it, again, to a point where you don't get convoluted, you don't get crowded. Try to keep it as simple as possible. Also, try to make sure that you are distinguishing color patterns within that line graph that aren't too similar, okay? Don't go, blue, blue-green, teal. Try to make sure that they are vastly different. Red, black, green, that's a really good shot. Red, black, yellow. You want to make sure that, because if you start to look at the horizontal axis, if you had your tick marks a little closer and those start to touch or cross a little bit within that graph, and you've got similar colors across the board, you're going to be in a mess. People are going to get completely lost. So make sure that when you're using that, you're using a color scheme that is going to be vastly different within those lines, so that people can easily distinguish which is going to be which. Same with the deviation lines. Make sure that you're using stark coloring that's going to contrast well. This is going to extend to the vertical scale and below the zero baseline to display positive and negative values in one graph. Simple band or area graph shades in the area beneath the main plot lines to highlight specific information. Again, make sure that when you're using this stuff, you don't overcrowd. Don't overcrowd with these either. Also, these are not going to be, a multiple band graph isn't going to be something you typically want to use if you're going to have information that's going to be crossing over. So if the data is all going to be separated, if you're going to be having clearly distinguishable borders within that, that's fine. But once it starts to cross over, this becomes impossible. All right, when it comes to tables, never include too much information within a single table. As we've already said, that's going to just make things a little bit more difficult for people to read. You want to make sure that you are providing a brief but descriptive title. Label the rows and columns clearly, and try to do so in abbreviated formats if you can. Line up the data and information clearly so that there's no confusion. Keep qualitative information and quantitative data brief. Provide additional information only if necessary, okay? With bar graphs, make sure that you're using a bar graph only to compare values that are noticeably different. Keep the graph simple and easy to read. Number your scales and units familiar to the audience. Don't start bringing in strange ways of trying to number or evaluate your data. Don't start getting weird with tick marks and putting don't over use tick marks, good stuff like that. Label both scales to show what's being measured and compared. Again, tick marks to show the points of division on your scale, but don't crowd those tick marks. There's nothing worse than crowded tick marks. Nothing. It sucks. And make all bars the same width for aesthetic reasons. And also for, confusion, for keeping people from becoming confused. When they start to see different sized bars on the graph, they start to wonder why. You know, even though you may not have meant any kind of specific emphasis, it may come out that way anyway if you're not careful. Multiple bar graphs use a different pattern, color, or shape or shade for each bar in a cluster. Make sure that you're referring to graph by number, figure 1. Too few people do this when they turn their papers into me. All right, you need to make sure that you are labeling these figure 1s and all that good stuff, and you need to be referring to them in the text. There's no reason that a graph or a chart should just float all on its own out there. Never, never do that. You always need to refer to it within the text. Line graphs, follow the guidelines above for bar graphs. With these additions, make sure that you display no more than 3 or 4 lines on one graph for the sake of clarity. Mark each individual data point used in plotting each line so that people understand exactly where that plot falls within that chart. Make each line visually distinct using color symbols, and so on, and make sure that when you are using color, you're using color that contrasts. You don't want to use similar colors within a similar color scheme. In fact, I would recommend that go from, you know, medium to hot to cold colors. Don't just use all specific colors. Don't use just all cool color patterns. Label each line so readers know what the given line represents. And avoid grid lines that readers could mistake for plotted lines. The terms chart and graph are often used interchangeably, but they aren't technically that way. Charts typically display relationships, quantitative or cause and effect, that are not plotted on a coordinate system such as an X and Y axes. Pie charts will typically display a relationship of parts or percentages to the whole. Simple pie chart simply shows the relationship of parts to the whole, and exploded pie chart highlights various slices. Exploded pie charts and 3D pie charts can also be developed using Microsoft Word. Also, I can't stress enough the importance of typically using miscellaneous or all others. If you have several non-critical points of data that you want to go and add and kind of like put in there, put that into a miscellaneous pie or a cluster, and then make sure you explain what that is in the text. Don't overload the graph itself. Organization charts are going to show the hierarchy of relationships between different departments and other organization. If anything, think of this as kind of ancestry.com. You can see that everything comes from a common ancestor, but may not necessarily be a direct descendant of something, okay? It may only share a relationship in some way. Flow charts trace procedures and processes from the beginning to the end, and this is ways that you will see a lot of lockout, tagout procedures within large machinery, within manufacturing companies. You can easily tell what happens when you use one side or the other. For your intents and purposes on the popular report, though, this will probably be one that you won't typically use. And this is a bit of a more sophisticated flow chart. There are much more simple flow charts out there that will show relationships just as well. Tree charts are similar to what we looked at earlier with flow charts. It's showing relationships. It's just showing it on a horizontal axis. That's the only big difference. In fact, I don't know how many of you go to things like ancestry.com to see what a common ancestor might be or what a common originating factor might be, but you can actually transfer it from top down, from a vertical to a horizontal. All right, let's see. Gantt charts. Gantt charts can be very sophisticated. Be careful doing these. Depict how the parts of an idea or concept relate. A series of bars or lines, timelines indicate startup and completion dates for each phase or task in a complete project. Uh, Make sure that you are using a clear color scheme. Make sure that you are clearly marking data, and for all, no matter what, never do your best to not overload this chart. Charts are going to use shapes and arrows, outline of projects, main activities, and events. I'm going to try to skip through some of this stuff because, I mean, you will not be using a lot of this. Pictograms. This is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. It's okay to use specific pictograms I mean, sometimes they can be fun. They can kind of, especially within a popular report, they can be very rhetorical and really show strong relationships within the information that you're arguing. But try not to get too creative. You want to still try to keep it professional, and you want to keep your color scheme very, very limited on these. The more colors, the more fancy and designy and all that good stuff this thing gets, the less professional it starts to look. And you're really wanting professionalism is a really big point of ethos. It's a really big point of the rhetorical argument that you're trying to make, especially within a popular document. So guidelines for creating charts. When you come to pie charts, you want to make sure that the parts of the pie charts add up to 100% for crying out loud. You would not believe how often I have seen 110%. Okay, that's theoretical. That's stuff that we say when we are kissing ass or brown nosing. I'm going to give my 110%. Try to make sure that you can do math in these cases. Differentiate and label each slice clearly. Keep all labels horizontal and combine very small piece slices, pie slices. Make sure that you have a miscellaneous section for non-crit data, and then go and explain that within the text itself. Organization charts, make sure that you move from top, bottom, or left to right. Keep it uniform. Keep it so that the human mind can process it correctly. Use downward or rightward pointing arrows, and keep boxes uniform and text very brief so that you're not crowding. Flow charts, tree charts, and Gantt charts, make sure that you move from top to bottom or right to left. Use connector lines to show relationships there. Keep boxes uniform and text brief. With pictograms, follow the guidelines for the bar graphs. Use symbols that are universally recognized. Don't use, if you're talking about dogs or whatever, don't use dog treats, or don't use dog duke or anything like that. Make sure that you're keeping it very professional, and also make sure that you're using things that people are going to understand what they are. What is dog duke in this country might be ice cream in another. I have no idea. Keep the pictogram clean and simple, and avoid too much visual color. Avoid too many design choices. Make sure that you're keeping it simple and professional. Graphic illustrations can be diagrams, maps, drawings, icons, photographs, or any other visual that relies mainly on pictures rather than on data or words. Avoid using illustrations simply to decorate a page. Each illustration you use should serve a specific purpose, even within your popular articles, okay? Even within your popular reports. When you're going out and you're designing a popular report to find just that right picture to go in and talk about the black holes that you're trying to explain, the discovery with black holes that was just released, and you want to go in and you want to talk about it. Using a picture of a black hole would be great because it puts people within that frame of reference. So make sure that you use things that serve a purpose and that you're not just popping in there. You don't want to talk about black holes and then put the picture of a boot in there. I mean, nobody's going to understand what the hell you're talking about. Make sure that it relates to the information, and it does help with the argument by adding pictures that you might think that these pictures are senseless, but that's not necessarily the case. The evidence has shown that these images actually help rhetorically with the argument. If we were in class, I could pull up a couple of websites where correct information was written on a website that looked non-professional, and then lies were basically put on a website that had, or a web page that had a very professional appearance. And typically people believed the one that looked professional over the one that was sloppy. That's sad. That's the world we live in. So make sure that you understand that this is a rhetorical principle. People flock to professionalism. If it looks professional, they'll believe it. Okay. So let me real quick go back to graphic illustrations. Okay, never mind. Diagrams, they're going to illustrate how things work or fit together by altering their real appearance. These are extremely important within engineering. They help us to discern how something works, which way to turn something, or just refer to, exactly what we're supposed to be doing when we're supposed to be doing it. Maps are especially useful for showing comparisons and for helping other users visualize position, location, relationships among various data. Um, you can't go anywhere on the internet today without seeing some type of map, uh, graphic illustration where we're talking about politics or coronavirus or whatever. So if you want more examples, type in coronavirus and click on images. Good luck. Symbols and icons convey information visually to a wide range of audiences, but make sure that these are universally known and understood symbols. Okay, don't just start making your own up. These symbols really do. There is really an international agreement upon what are specific symbols and what they mean. So you can actually Google that and see uh, what are internationally recognized symbols for specific things, and it should help you out in that case. Drawings and diagrams provide clear explanations. Use lines and arrows to indicate direction and motion. Keep diagram illustrations simple. Don't try to convolute it or get crowded. Label each important part. Maps, use maps from credible sources such as the U.S. Census Bureau and other government agencies, not Fox News, Huffington Post, CNN, none of that crap. Okay, you make sure that you pull, I don't care if they say they pulled theirs from the U.S. Census Bureau, you go pull yours from the U.S. Census Bureau. Keep colors to a minimum so that the maps are easy to read on a computer or in print. And understand that colors do not translate the same from a computer screen to print, okay? One is going to run on an RGB scale, another is going to run on the cyan scale. So make sure that you are understanding that your colors may not, there's nothing, we've all had that point where we've gone and we've tried to print something and we're like, why is this thing printing in this color and it looks all weird? It's because it doesn't translate the same, okay? So make sure that you understand that um, colors are going to vary whether they're going to be printed or whether they're going to be shown digitally. Sometimes it's not a bad idea to have a document that works, that has two versions, a printed version and a digital version. Symbols and icons, use internationally recognized symbols and icons, and you can Google a list of internationally recognized symbols and icons if you wish. They are out there. Photographs are especially useful for showing exactly how something works, looks, or how something is done. I don't know how many times I could have been saved on putting furniture together if someone would have just taken a damn photograph of it and shown me how to do it in the first place. Unlike a diagram, which highlights certain parts of an item, photographs show everything in detail. All right, so while a photograph can be extremely useful, it can also provide too much detail or fail to emphasize the parts on which you want people to focus. So guidelines for using photographs, you want to make sure that you simulate the reader's angle of vision. That's going to mean that let's say if you're going to be taking a picture of you putting together a specific cabinet or a couch or whatever, if it's someone going to be standing over top of it, you want to take a top-down picture of that. You want to trim and crop the photograph and eliminate any needless detail. There's nothing worse than seeing a beer can in the floor beside the furniture that you're trying to put up. All right. Take out anything that's going to distract the reader from what you want them to do. Provide a sense of scale for an object unfamiliar to the readers. If they've never seen it before, give them some kind of a frame of reference. Label all the parts readers need to identify. Supplement the photograph with diagrams if you have to. Try, again, don't go and start putting needless graphics in there if you don't need them. If your document's going to be published, attend to the legal aspects. This means Don't go in there wearing a t-shirt that says Hillary 2020. Don't go in there saying with a t-shirt that says, that has an arrow pointing over that says I'm with stupid. All right. Also make sure that you're not wearing t-shirts that say Nike or Chicago Bulls. You want to go with plain clothing that doesn't really, that you're not going to have issues with copyright infringement or something where you're going to have to pay someone or you should have gotten permission to go and use that information. NFL's really bad about that stuff. Nike's really bad about that stuff. And I'm going to tell you right now, nothing is going to make someone take that piece of furniture back faster than someone that says, you know, to hell with Trump or whatever, right? So make sure that you are using, make sure that you dress appropriately. Also, in that same breath, make sure that if you are trying to show someone how to operate a specific mechanical device, a suit and tie might not be the way to go for someone to work on that. You want to try to keep it realistic to the individual who's going to be putting something together. All right, we do not put things together in suit and ties. If you're trying to give a speech or you're teaching someone how to give a speech, a suit and tie may be the way to go. All right. So guidelines for using photographs, explain what readers should look for in the photo and use appropriate digital sources. Do not alter photos. And by do not alter photos, don't alter photos that you take from somewhere else. Great places to go and look for your photos if you didn't take them, Pixabay. Pixabay is a great resource. Now in Google, you can go in and you can search and you can look for images that are free to use. However, just because Google says that they're free use doesn't mean they're free use. Okay, I have gone into Google and looked at those things with those free to use licensing agreements, and it's pulled up things from the NFL, the NBA, everything else. That's just not the case. The NFL does not have anything that I know of that is just free licensing. So make sure that you know what you're getting into. Like I said, Pixabay, Creative Commons is another great place to go and look at this kind of things. But make sure you understand what that Creative Commons license is. There are varying license for them. When you do get an image, make sure that it says that it's free to use. If it's free to use, you may alter that photo to a certain extent. And by alter that photo, I mean you can make it smaller or bigger. However, be aware that when you enlarge a photo, you start to lose integrity within the image. The pixels are set within a certain DPI. Now, there are images out there called vector images that you can use, and vector images will let you expand and make the image a little larger, and it automatically fills in missing pixels. But make sure that you know what you're using and how it's going to look before you use it. Also, if you take it from somewhere, always give credit to whoever you've taken that from. Okay, don't just stick a photo in there. Now, if you've taken it from Pixabay or you've taken it from somewhere like or Creative Commons or whatever, you do not have to cite that. You can just stick that in there. If it's clip art, something that's from, you know, the common, if it's something that's in the Commons, Creative Commons, you can use it all day long. If you take that image from somewhere else, give credit. If you take that image from somewhere who is really strict with licensing, NFL or something, you must have permission before you can use that image. All right. Okay, that said, I'm going to end this lecture there. Does anyone within the group have any specific questions that they would like to talk about? So it seems I have Sloan, Chloe, Mallory, Eric, and Zoe, and Mackenzie. Any of you guys have any questions?
No, I don't. Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. All right. So I see Eric. He said no through chat. Crap. There's 4 messages here in chat. All right. So it looks like Lucas is putting up some stuff here in chat. If you guys want to check that out, look over on the chat, and they're putting some stuff, looks like some open stuff that's great, Dia Diagram Editor, GIMP, free version. So yeah, thank you for that, Lucas. I really appreciate that. So anybody wants to go and look at that, check it out. Any questions other than that, let me know. If you want to email me with a question off camera or whatever, that's fine. I'm going to be here for another 45 or 50 minutes because this is my office hours time now. So I'm going to keep this open for people to just bounce up in here. If you don't have any questions and you feel comfortable, feel free to leave. Have a great one. Stay safe and be healthy.
Thanks, you too.